I'm Camilla. I'm 34, and at 14, my parents told me my older sister Valentina needed a kidney to live. They operated on me, they took the organ. I spent 20 years believing I'd saved her life. Until one night at a medical school reunion party, a drunk doctor told me, "Valentina, that woman never had renal failure. Your father paid for a false diagnosis. The kidney went to a client." A client, not my sister. To a sick, rich, desperate politician who needed a compatible transplant and didn't want to wait on a list. My father was a surgeon. My mother was a nurse, and I was the compatible source they had at home. But that isn't the worst part. The worst part is that it wasn't just the kidney. At 16, I donated bone marrow. At 19, I lent part of my liver. At 22, I regenerated tissue for Valentina's experimental treatment. Each time, I woke up in a hospital not remembering how I got there. Each time my parents told me I'd agreed while sedated, that I'd signed, that I'd chosen to save my sister. I never saw the documents. I never asked, until I found the file. In the basement of the family home. 14 operations, 14 donations. None for Valentina, all sold, all documented. All with my signature, in handwriting I recognized as my mother's. And when I confronted them at Valentina's birthday dinner, with 60 guests, with the politician who received my first kidney seated at the head table, my father said, "You were created for this, Camilla. You're a rental daughter. Your mother couldn't have more children after Valentina, so we designed you, we bought you, and we used you as purchased." What they didn't know is that I'd already spoken to the police. And that the woman who sold you to them, my biological mother, was sitting in my car outside, waiting, with her own story, and with the DNA that proved Valentina was also a rental daughter, that none of us were real, that we were all products, and that products sometimes become dangerous when they discover the truth. I grew up in a house that smelled of antiseptic and achievement. My father, Dr. Roberto Viga, was a renowned cardiovascular surgeon, the kind whose name opened doors in hospitals across 3 countries. My mother, Marta, was a head nurse who'd become a clinic administrator, the kind who organized charity galas and spoke about the gift of life with tears in her eyes that looked real from a distance. We lived in a mansion with a wrought iron gate, the kind that kept people out while pretending to invite them in. Valentina was the center. 8 years older, beautiful in a fragile way, with dark circles under her eyes that my mother called romantic and visitors called concerning. She was always sick, always special, always needing something that the rest of us could provide. When I was small, I gave her my toys, my attention, the best seat at dinner. When I was older, I gave her my time, my patience, my understanding when she snapped at me for breathing too loudly near her resting. I was 14 when they told me about the kidney. Valentina was 22, supposedly in end-stage renal failure, her life measured in months without a transplant. My parents sat me in my father's study, the one with leather chairs and medical textbooks that smelled of old paper and authority. They explained compatibility, family donation, the special bond between sisters. They showed me a chart with Valentina's declining function, red lines plunging toward 0. "You'll be a hero," my mother said, holding my hand. "You'll save your sister's life, there's no greater gift." I didn't hesitate. I was 14, eager to matter, desperate to be seen as something other than the healthy afterthought to Valentina's fragile importance. The surgery was scheduled quickly, my parents' connections cutting through waiting lists that didn't apply to us. I woke up in a hospital bed, my left side aching, my parents smiling with tears that looked real. "Valentina is doing wonderfully," my mother said. "She's already showing improvement. You did this, Camilla, you saved her." I believed them. For 20 years, I believed them. I finished high school while recovering, my grades slipping, but my parents too focused on Valentina's post-transplant care to notice. I went to college, studied biology, became a teacher. I lived alone, never married, never had children. My health was always fragile, fatigue, abdominal pain, a weakened immune system that my doctors attributed to the donation, to generosity that takes its toll. I accepted this. I wore it as a badge. I was the sister who gave. I was the hero. At 16, I donated bone marrow. I woke up in a hospital, my hips aching, my parents explaining that Valentina had developed a blood disorder, that I'd agreed to the procedure while sedated for a routine checkup, that I'd signed forms I didn't remember. I believed them. At 19, I lent part of my liver. Another emergency, another sedated agreement, another signature in my handwriting that looked slightly off. I believed them. At 22, I regenerated tissue for Valentina's experimental treatment. I woke up with stitches I didn't remember getting, my parents showing me forms with my signature, explaining my own words back to me. I never asked to see the documents. I never questioned the gaps in my memory. I was the good daughter, the generous sister, the healthy one who existed to keep the fragile one alive. The medical school reunion was accidental. I didn't attend medical school, but my roommate from college did, and she dragged me to the party, promising networking opportunities for a biology teacher who might want to change careers. I was 34, tired, attending out of obligation rather than desire. Dr. Ernesto Vargas was drunk. He'd been my father's resident 20 years ago, now a failed surgeon who'd retreated to rural practice. He saw me, recognized me, approached with the false intimacy of shared history. "Camila Viga," he slurred. "Roberto's daughter, the donor, how's Valentina?" Still pretending, I didn't understand. Pretending, he laughed, a sound without humor. "Valentina, that woman never had renal failure. Your father paid for a false diagnosis, bought a compliant nephrologist, fabricated the labs, put her on dialysis for show. The kidney went to a client. Senator Aldama, remember him, the one who'd been on the waiting list for 3 years who was about to die. Roberto made a problem, created a solution, and everyone got what they wanted. Except you, I suppose, but you were 14. What did you know?" I stood frozen. The room continued around me, music playing, people laughing, the normal world proceeding while mine dissolved. I asked him to repeat. He did, adding details, names, amounts. The $200,000 payment to my father, the compliant nephrologist who'd retired to a yacht, the dialysis sessions that were saline infusions performed in a private clinic for show. Valentina, healthy, taking immunosuppressants she didn't need, developing real side effects from unnecessary medications. I left the party. I didn't confront Ernesto further, didn't ask for proof, didn't do anything except walk to my car and sit in the dark for 3 hours, my hands shaking, my body remembering the surgery, the pain, the 20 years of believing I'd been a hero when I'd been a harvest. The investigation took 6 months. I used my biology training, my access to medical databases, my father's connections that still recognized my name. I found Senator Aldama's transplant records, the anonymous donor who'd saved his life in 2004, the compatibility match that was suspiciously perfect. I found Valentina's medical history, the absence of any documented renal failure in public records, the lack of any transplant center that had performed her supposed surgery. I found the basement file by accident. I was visiting my parents' house while they traveled to a medical conference. Valentina's birthday approaching, the mansion being prepared for a celebration I was expected to attend. Valentina had given me a key to check the pipes, a task I knew nothing about but accepted as another favor in a lifetime of favors. The basement was unfinished, storage for old furniture and medical equipment, and boxes of documents my father never threw away. I found the false wall behind a water heater, the panel that clicked open when I pressed the right spot, years of habit making my fingers move without thought. Inside was a safe, the kind for important documents, the kind that implied secrets. 14 folders, each with my name, each with a donation procedure. Kidney 2004, age 14, bone marrow 2006, age 16, liver partial 2009, age 19, corneal tissue 2010, age 20, ovarian tissue 2012, age 22, skin grafts, blood plasma, stem cells, bone fragments. Each folder had a recipient, names, addresses, amounts paid, politicians, businessmen, wealthy foreigners. Total collected $4.2 million. My signatures on every consent form in handwriting that looked like mine but wasn't, the loops slightly wrong, the pressure too consistent, the work of my mother's careful forgery. But there was another file. Yellowed, separate with stamps from a fertility clinic in Tijuana. Surrogacy contract with extended purchase option. Date, 1989. Gestational carrier, Dolores Rios. Purchasers, Dr. Roberto and Marta Viga. Special clause. Purchase includes rights to biological products derived from the fetus, with extended consent until majority, in case the product is compatible with medical needs of the family or authorized third parties. I was a rental daughter, designed, purchased, with a clause for biological products. Not a daughter, inventory. I found Dolores Rios through the clinic's records, cross-referencing addresses, tracing a woman who disappeared from official records but still existed in the margins. She was 54, living in poverty in a one-room apartment with a shared bathroom, working cleaning jobs that her damaged kidneys made increasingly difficult. She was sick. She was broken. She was waiting. She told me her story over tea that tasted of cheap bags and old water. She'd been young, poor, pregnant with twins. The clinic offered $5,000 per baby. They said it was for a rich family that couldn't have children. She never knew they were for doctors, never knew one family was the clinic itself, never knew her daughters would be used as spare parts. They took you both, she said, crying. Then they came back, 3 years later, said they needed more tissue, something compatible in emergency. They sedated me, took a kidney while I was out, said it was a cesarean that didn't happen. I woke up with stitches and one less organ and a check that bounced. I held her hand. It was my hand, the same shape, the same small scar on the thumb from a childhood accident I didn't remember. We were connected by biology and theft, by a market that had sold us both. Dolores had proof. Documents from the clinic, DNA from the twins, and something more. She'd kept a journal, years of entries, names, dates, suspicions. She'd tried to report it once to a police officer who'd visited her apartment, who'd taken her statement, who'd never followed up. She'd seen him later in a photograph with my father at a medical charity event. The final discovery was the most devastating. Valentina, my sister, was also a rental daughter. Different mother, different purchase, different contract. Valentina didn't know. She believed she was my parents' biological child, the fragile one who needed saving, the center of the family narrative. But she'd been used too. At 18, they'd extracted her eggs for her own fertility treatment, sold them to couples desperate for children, covered her treatment with the proceeds. Her 3 children, my nieces and nephews, were biologically from another woman's eggs. Valentina was a mother who'd never passed on her own genetic material. A vessel like me, a product like me. I didn't confront my parents immediately. I prepared. I contacted the police, the prosecutor's office, a journalist who'd investigated medical corruption. I arranged for Dolores to be present, to testify, to provide the DNA that would prove everything. And I chose the venue. Valentina's 42nd birthday, the celebration my parents organized every year, the event that showcased their successful family, their medical legacy, their charitable generosity. The senator was there. Aldama, now 70, still in office, still speaking about the importance of organ donation at every opportunity. He was the guest of honor, seated at the head table, his health robust thanks to a kidney that had been mine at 14. I watched him from across the room, this man who'd received my organ without knowing my name, who'd paid my father for the privilege of my body, who now spoke about the gift of life with the same tears my mother used. I waited until dessert. The cake was wheeled out, Valentina's face on the icing, the room applauding, my father preparing his annual toast about family, love, and the miracles of modern medicine. I stood up. I walked to the head table. I placed the folders down, one by one, each landing with a sound that silenced the room. Senator Aldama, I said, do you remember your kidney transplant in 2004? The anonymous donor who saved your life. I was 14. I was told I was saving my sister. I was actually saving you, and my father was paid $200,000 for the privilege of my ignorance. The room went still. Aldama's face went white. My father stood, his medical authority crumbling into something small and desperate. Camilla, you've been ill, you're confused. These documents are forged. I opened the first folder, showed my signature, showed the medical records, showed the compatibility tests that matched me to Aldama, not Valentina. Like my signatures were forged, like my consent was forged, like my entire life was forged. My mother stood, her composure cracking, her charity gala mask slipping. We saved lives. We helped people. Valentina never needed anything. I opened another folder, showed Valentina's real medical records, the absence of any renal failure, the saline dialysis sessions, the unnecessary immunosuppressants that had damaged her real health. Valentina was healthy. Valentina was a prop, and Valentina was also purchased. I turned to my sister, who sat frozen, her face a mask of confusion that was becoming horror. You're not their daughter, Valentina. You're a product like me. Your eggs were sold. Your children are biologically from another woman. Everything you believed about your fragility, your specialness, your need, was manufactured to justify what they did to me, and to you. Valentina made a sound, not quite a word, not quite a scream. My father tried to intervene, his medical authority transforming into physical threat, but the police were already entering, following the signal I'd arranged, the backup I'd prepared. My father turned to me, his face twisted with something that wasn't quite anger, wasn't quite fear. You were created for this, Camilla. You're a rental daughter. Your mother couldn't have more children after Valentina, so we designed you, we bought you, and we used you as purchased. The words hung in the air, the confession he'd never intended to make, the truth that was worse than any accusation. I looked at him, at this man who'd been my hero, my model, my creator in more ways than I'd known. I know, I said, and now everyone else knows too. Dolores entered, escorted by officers, her presence the final proof, her DNA the key that unlocked everything. The room dissolved into chaos, Aldama trying to flee, my mother collapsing into a chair, Valentina staring at me with eyes that held 42 years of constructed identity dissolving into nothing. The trial took 2 years. My father was convicted of human trafficking, organ trafficking, medical fraud, and multiple counts of assault. My mother was convicted as accomplice, her nursing license revoked, her charity work exposed as a front for procurement. Aldama was impeached, his transplant revealed as purchased, his advocacy exposed as self-interest. Other recipients were traced, other doctors implicated, a network of medical corruption that spanned 3 countries and 3 decades. I testified. Valentina testified. Dolores testified. We were not sisters, not mother and daughter, not any of the relationships we'd been assigned. We were survivors of a system that had designed us, sold us, used us, and told us to be grateful for the privilege. Valentina and I built something slowly. Not sisterhood, that was too simple, too expected, too much like the narrative our parents had constructed. We built alliance. We built shared understanding. We built the ability to look at each other without the roles we'd been assigned. The fragile one and the strong one, the receiver and the giver, the center and the support. She was angry, at me for revealing her constructed identity, at our parents for creating it, at herself for believing it. She went through years of therapy, of learning who she was without the illness that had defined her, without the specialness that had been her currency. She learned she was healthy. She learned she was capable. She learned her children were hers by love if not by genetics, and that this was enough, more than enough, the only thing that had ever mattered. Dolores opened a center. She called it Las Gemelas, the twins, the daughters she'd lost and lost again in different ways. It was a support center for victims of organ trafficking and surrogacy exploitation, for women who'd been used as incubators and spare parts, for children who'd discovered they were products rather than people. I worked there, teaching biology, helping others understand their bodies, reclaim their rights, recognize their value beyond their utility. I taught them about consent, about autonomy, about the difference between giving and being taken from. I taught them that their bodies were theirs, had always been theirs, regardless of what had been done to them. I taught them that the system that had designed us could be dismantled when we refused to be consumed. At 40, I had a child. A pregnancy planned, controlled mine. I called her Esperanza, not for optimism but for choice. Because for the first time, my body was only mine. Because I could choose to create, to nurture, to protect without being harvested. Because teaching Esperanza that her body belonged to her was the only revenge that truly mattered. Valentina became a counselor at Las Gemelas. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually. She worked with women who'd been the fragile ones, the special ones, the constructed patients whose illnesses justified others' exploitation. She helped them find their real health, their real strength, their real selves beneath the roles they'd been assigned. We never called each other sisters. We called each other allies. We called each other survivors. We called each other by our names, which we'd chosen to keep, which we'd reclaimed from the market that had sold us, which we'd made our own through use and time and choice. My parents died in prison. My father first, a heart attack, the irony of a cardiovascular surgeon killed by his own organ. My mother later, slower, her mind dissolving into something that might have been dementia or might have been the final escape from a reality she couldn't face. I didn't attend either funeral. I didn't send flowers. I simply noted their deaths as I noted the changing seasons, as events that changed the world in small ways that I would process eventually. Esperanza is 7 now. She knows her body belongs to her. She knows that giving is a choice, not an obligation. She knows that love doesn't require sacrifice of self, that care doesn't require destruction of boundaries. That family is something you build rather than something you're sold into. She stands on a stool in the kitchen of Las Gemelas, helping mix dough for the weekly community bread, her small hands covered in flour, her voice singing a song she made up about yeast and time and transformation. She is healthy. She is whole. She is hers. If someone told you that your body was created for their use, that your existence was designed for their benefit, that your value was in what you could provide rather than who you are, hear me. You were never theirs, you were never designed, you were never purchased, never sold, never inventory. You were always a person from before they touched you through every violation to this moment of reading these words. Your body is yours, your life is yours, your choice is yours. And the system that tried to consume you can be dismantled when you refuse to be consumed. That's my story. If it spoke to you, comment below. If you discovered that your body was used without your true consent, tell me. I'll read every word. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.